They took her in, they took x-rays, and they said, surgery is your only option. Made that appointment for 3 weeks down the road, and then asked him, what do I do between here and now? Because obviously I've got a dog with a torn ligament, and they told me just carprofen and nothing but leash walks, short leash walks on a level surface for the next 3 weeks. Yeah, he said, the non-injured knee tends to fail within 12 to 18 months in 50% of dogs who have the surgery on one knee. He said, if you want to go with if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm going to tell you right now, I made the wrong call. And I would strongly encourage someone, if they have advice from a reputable surgeon and they recommend both knees, I highly recommend that you do it. She was cleared for full activity. I just kind of eased back into it. I was just coming back from the park down the street, and nothing specific that I can point to that, this caused that, but she just started limping on her right side, and it looked exactly like it did on the left. And as soon as I got home, I called the vet, and we got her in, and sure enough, here we go again.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY. I am joined this week by Cliff Hawkins. We are going to go over his journey and real-life experience of navigating a TPL surgery for his dog who had a CCL injury. Cliff, welcome to the show. Thanks for reaching out. You sent me an article that you wrote on it. It was very thorough, and we're going to get to that here in a second. But obviously, it opened up a lot of questions and something that I thought was really valuable to anybody that owns a dog that is faced with this decision potentially one day.
Yeah, well, thank you. When I wrote the article, the thought was that I've gone through this. When I went through it, there weren't really a whole lot of folks to ask questions to. I knew one gal who's gone through a couple of them, but she just wasn't really all that forthcoming with the challenges involved. I mean, she was as helpful as she could be, but I had a lot of questions, and didn't always feel like I got as much information from her as I wanted. And so I kind of navigated this to some degree on my own, and thought, if and when somebody has to go through this, it might be nice to have just a little bit more information on what you can anticipate.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of why I went about it.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you emailed me the article. I read through it again. Like I just said, it was extremely thorough. If anybody is facing this decision or has questions, or like you said, just searching for some kind of clarity and kind of a mess up situation, let's face it, nobody buys a bird dog to be faced with this decision. Knock on wood, we hope that, we all kind of go through our dog careers without ever having to face this. But at the end of the day, when we go out and we're hunting and we're going to be doing this active lifestyle, there's always that chance, right? Especially, given different breeds, different genetics, there's a whole bunch of different underlying issues within this. But we're not really going to go into so much the causes or even the types of procedures or something. I mean, we're going to gloss over some of that stuff, but just to let the listeners know, after reading your article, it sparked a lot of questions on my end, and so I went ahead and reached out to my buddy Jay Brecky, and I'm going to do a follow-up episode from a veterinary's perspective on this type of procedure, because it is becoming so prevalent in the gun dog space. I think it's worthwhile to do the subject justice with somebody that's actually their profession and their career, and then you and I can just talk about what it's like from an actual dog owner's perspective, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, perfect.
So let's go ahead and let's kind of set the stage here for a little bit. Introduce yourself, talk about your dog, Ruby, what breed, just kind of give us the build up to the actual when the injury actually happened.
Okay. So Ruby is a, female poodle pointer. She's about 60 pounds. Um, the injury occurred when she was 3 years old. She came to me, I think, with probably some issues that I wasn't keen enough or experienced enough to spot very early on, as early as a year old. We were dealing with lameness issues and limping, you know, um, after exercise. And I, to be honest with you, it's my fault for not pursuing that and getting into a vet and say, hey, this dog is, I've got a year-old dog. She's on a 3-hour hunt, and she limps for a day and a half afterwards. I'm really at fault for not pursuing and finding out what was going on. I just, very ignorantly made the assumption that, well, this is when a dog's out there working, they're under intense, their muscles are under intense stress, and maybe this is normal. Well, I know that that's not normal now, but at the time, and shame on me, but I was just ignorant to the situation. So we started seeing some lameness when she was about a year old, and then when she was 3 years old, it was the second day of the season, and this was 2000, and she she was in good shape. I'm a teacher, and so I've got 10 weeks off during the summer, and so I'm out with my dogs anywhere 3 to 4, sometimes 5 days a week, and on trails, getting them in shape for the season, keeping them in shape. So it's not like she was coming into this out of shape. And we were hunting mountain quail, which here in Western Oregon, the terrain is steep, the cover is really really thick and nasty. She came on point. She pointed a covey on the edge of a road, and I moved in, made the flush, and the birds headed into this stand of thin timber. And what they do out here in the Pacific Northwest, in not every case, but a lot of cases, what they'll do is when a stand gets to a certain size, a stand of Douglas fir gets to a certain size, they'll come in and thin. And those trees will be, roughly 6 to 8 inches, and they'll just drop those trees and leave them where they lie. And so, needless to say, you've got a lot of down timber in, that sort of stand. And so these birds flushed into that timber. She went in after them, and when she came back, she had a really severe limp in her left leg. And I knew that this wasn't like the lameness that maybe I'd seen before. This was different. Something was going on here. So we immediately pulled the plug. We had probably, I don't know, mile and a half or 2 miles back to the truck, and then I called the vet, loaded her up, and that was a Saturday afternoon, and I was able to get her into the vet, fortunately, before they closed.
So now,
And
when you made your guys' way back to the truck, is she still walking? I mean, you said that she's limping, and I mean, obviously, as soon as she came out of the fall down, or the downfall, that she was limping. You noticed she was lame. Were you carrying her? Was she at heel? Was she on a leash? Kind of walk us through that. Did you have to put her in the vest or anything?
yeah, I didn't have a vest at that time that would accommodate her, so that wasn't an option. I tried carrying her, and that was stressing her out, and she was just fighting that. She just didn't want to be carried, and so I just put a slip lead on her, and we just walked back. So and that may or may have not have been the best decision. That's at the time, that's what I was able to do. So
Yeah. I mean, you got to make do when you're in the field like that, and one way or the other, you got to get back to the truck. And if she's fighting you while trying to carry her, you could probably make the case that she could injure herself trying to fight you more so than just limping along on the road back to the truck.
Yeah, that was my logic. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So
that's
you guys get back to the truck and you hightail it to the vet on a Saturday. Of course, these things never happen on a weekday. Of course, you're out
no.
hunting mostly on the weekend, but of course that's emergency vet hour. So going in that this is gonna suck for the wallet. So walk us through. You walk into the vet on a Saturday and walk us continue the story from there.
Yeah, well, this was COVID, so there was no walking into any vet. That's for sure.
Just add an
So
extra layer
yeah,
to the equation.
yeah. So we, you know, I was able to get her to my vet here in the nearby town where I live, and they just had Saturday hours, and they took her in, they took X-rays, and they said she's torn her, I believe it's called the cruciate, um,
The canine cruciate
cruciate.
ligament.
Thank you. The canine cruciate ligament. Essentially, they told me said that's equivalent to a human of a ACL
Right.
tear. And so obviously that was not what I wanted to hear, but I don't think I was all that surprised. And I said, "Well, what do I do now?" And they said, "Well, you've got to, surgery is your only option." Now, if you do research on this, you know what you're going to find on the internet. You're going to find people that advocate for not doing surgery. But anyway, I that was not the path that I was going to take. So they recommended surgery, and this particular practice, they they didn't do the TPLO surgery, which stands, and if I get this wrong, please forgive me, but I believe it's tibia plasto tibia plateau leveling
Osteotomy.
os, osteotomies. Yeah,
And I didn't know that. I
and
have it
I'm
written down right here, so I have a cheat sheet.
yeah, smart man. So they didn't do that surgery at that facility. They did another surgery that they did not recommend for larger dogs, and that they didn't recommend for dogs that are, active hunting dogs. So they gave me the names of two different facilities to contact. Over the course of the next couple of days, I was able to get a hold of one of those facilities. The first one was Oregon State University, their veterinary medicine hospital, and the closest date that they could give me was, I think, 4 months out. So again, here we're in the COVID situation. So I wasn't going to go for that. There was another surgery about 45 minutes from my house north, in the Portland area, and they could get me in about 3 weeks. And so that was a really easy decision. And so made a decision that I would go with that facility, made that appointment for 3 weeks down the road, and then asked him, "What do I do between here and now?" Because obviously I've got a dog with a torn ligament, and they gave me some painkillers. It was an NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, carprofen, I believe it was what it was, and I don't know how effective that was, but they told me just carprofen and nothing but leash walks, short leash walks on a level surface for the next 3 weeks. So
So that sounds like they
that
were concerned with possibly making it worse. So was this a
I
complete tear? Like, I'm curious if it's already torn, is there really more damage that we can do to it?
yeah, and the impression that I got from them that I also got from the surgeon at the surgical facility was that as long as the dog was not going through, extreme exercise, real strenuous exercise, that there probably wasn't that much more damage that was going to be done. That was my impression. Could have been wrong. Don't know. But that was the impression that I had, and so it was just short leash walks down the street to the park, and sniff around for a few minutes, go pee, and then back to the house. So
So
needless to
the
say,
fun
that
and confinement for Ruby was already starting before you even got to the surgery, and we hadn't even gotten to the real confinement after the surgery.
correct. Yeah. So yeah, and I don't know how much detail you want to go, how much time you want to devote to the confinement discussion, but for me, it wasn't so much that I lost a hunting season because she was the only dog I had at the time. It wasn't so much that I'd lost a hunting season, although that was horrible. What really concerned me the most is I've got this high energy dog that if I don't keep, well exercised on a daily basis, um, never gets unruly, but just, I mean, she needs the exercise. And I don't think I'm, saying anything that everybody out there listening doesn't already know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
and I
anyway,
mean,
that was really my biggest concern.
yeah, I mean, we've spoken numerous times on this podcast how important it is to not only do physical exercise, but to do mental stimulus and everything. But let's face it, most of the time, even the mental games that we can play with our dogs or put our dogs through certain exercises still involve some sort of mobility with them walking or trotting or something. There's very few options. I know that they have like more or less like mental stimulus games now for dogs and stuff like that, but the level of mental fatigue that you have to get that dog to make a difference when you're talking about weeks and even months of confinement for a bird dog, that's tough. I mean, that would have been my main concern going into the process as well.
Yeah, it's daunting. And the thing is we're talking prey drive here. And my take on it, and yeah, there are other things that we can do to attempt to, mentally stimulate our dog. But the thing is I think the hunting or the fun runs out in the field, I think that's as much mental stimulation as it is physical because those dogs. And again, I'm not telling anybody here anything they don't already know. I mean, when those dogs are on a fun run, they're working. I mean, they're looking for game, and I think that's the mental stimulation that they crave. So working out a track or whatever it is they're doing, sniffing out a bunny, or if it's an appropriate time to be in the woods and on birds, and working birds. I mean, that's the mental stimulation that my interpretation is that these dogs really need to stay sane.
Yeah,
So
fair.
that's my point of view.
Yeah, no, that's a fair consideration, and yeah, I mean, either way, it's really more or less just when we talk about that, somebody that let's just say that all they do is like road their dogs, and they're not actually doing a fun run or a search. It's just physical exercise, or maybe they have a treadmill that they throw the dog on, or something like that. But either way, like no matter which way we spin it, most of the stuff that we do mentally with these dogs still involves mobility, and we're taking that away for an extended period of time. We have to get creative with how we stimulate the dogs, and let's face it, nothing's going to hold a candle to any of those options we've already previously listed.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, totally agree there. Yep.
Yeah. So you're getting to the surgery right now. It takes 3 weeks, which even out of COVID, 3 weeks, that's a heck of a lead time. I mean, I know people outside of COVID, it still took months to get into a reputable surgeon to do this type of surgery. So 3 weeks, it would have been nice to just been like, all right, let's just get it fixed. Let's get the clock going on the recovery. But at the same time, 3 weeks in the grand scheme of things really isn't that bad, relatively speaking.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing is I should say, is that 3 weeks was 3 weeks to the initial visit at the surgery facility. And so that's where they did all the preliminary work, all of the x-rays, and all of the preliminary work to the surgery. And then, so that when I actually took her in for that appointment and they did all the necessary preliminary work, we were able to schedule the surgery for, I believe it may have been the next week or maybe 2 weeks later, but again, it was a relatively short period. So I was really fortunate there.
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, that 3 week window was to get the initial work done, and then the actual surgery was scheduled for a week or two after that.
Gotcha. So anything of note during the lead time up to the surgery, or was it just kind of smooth sailing for the most part, just doing your short leash walks on flat ground and just getting to the surgical date? Was there anything of note during that time period?
It wasn't too bad, looking back. Um, and spoiler alert, she injured her right leg shortly after recovery on the left leg, and we'll get into that as well. Um, but this first go around, we'll say, with the left leg, it went relatively smooth. Yeah, she was a little bit more hyped up and wanting to go, like you would expect a bird dog that isn't getting out quite as much as they want to. But it wasn't unreasonable. It wasn't too bad.
So at this time, you kind of gave us a teaser of the other leg going out next too. When you're going through this process and planning the surgery, is the vet giving you any kind of guidance or advice based on, are they looking at that second leg while addressing the first leg just to see if there was some kind of underlying issues? Maybe there was overcompensation from the dog in those first few weeks. Kind of walk us through. Are they telling you that we hear all the time that the odds of the second leg going out is that much greater after the first one for a couple different reasons. The genetic component is still obviously there, but then also the overcompensation piece. So I'm just curious if the vet was bringing that to your attention during this process already in this stage of the journey.
That's a really good question. He told me that the right knee, that he could detect a fair amount of deterioration there. He told me that x-rays, when it comes to, arthritic deterioration, can only really tell you so much. And I think, when you talk to the veterinarian on the follow-up podcast, I would assume that he would probably verify that. So the surgeon told me that yes, that right knee was also compromised as well, and he offered to do TPLO on that knee as well.
At the same
And he said
time?
that was yes.
Okay.
And he said that was my call. And I'm going to tell you right now, I made the wrong call. I said no. I foolishly thought that, rehabbing two knees was going to be tougher than rehabbing one. Having gone through the process, I don't really think it would be appreciably more difficult.
Okay.
And I wish I would have taken him up on that, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, I'm happy to do it for you. He said, well, I didn't know at the time, but he said, and you referenced this also, that the non-injured knee tends to fail within 12 to 18 months in 50% of dogs who have the surgery on one knee. And so, but he said it's your call, and he said if you want to go with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it, we can go that way. And that's what I chose to do, and I regret it. And I would strongly encourage someone that if they have good, solid advice from a reputable surgeon, and they recommend both knees, I highly recommend that you do it.
Did it? I'm assuming it would save a little bit of money, at least maybe on anesthesia or the surgical setup. But like, obviously, it's going to cost extra more than what one would be. But I guess if you compare two separate surgical, space and anesthesia and all the equipment, that you probably would come out ahead if you were able to knock it out in one time under anesthesia. Is that correct?
I'm sure that's dead on. Now you can verify that, and I wasn't smart enough to figure that out either. But I think that is the case, and And I'll just, as long as you're bringing it up. So this first surgery, it ran me about, I don't know, it was about $7,800.
Mm,
Um, and that was everything. That was the X-rays, the surgery, the medication. That was all of the follow-up visits after the surgery. All the way through to, she's fully recovered and good to go. That was the first surgery. The second one was closer to, it was in the 9,000 range. There were some minor complications associated with that, and I don't know if that was responsible for the cost, or I don't know. I don't know why it was that much more appreciably expensive than the first one, but it was.
mm. Well, that's something that I'll have to ask Jay about, because I mean I could only assume you're using the resources the surgical centers used up. That a lot of that stuff is really what adds a lot of the cost to it. So if you're not having to schedule the place twice, then I would assume that that's going to save you a little bit of money. But who
Yeah,
knows? Yeah.
yeah. I don't know either, but I would just, if I had to do it again, I would, without a doubt, would have done both knees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything else getting to the surgery that your vet kind of brought up in that same spirit that he's advising you, giving you options on? Was there anything else that you needed to, as the owner, take stock of and really kind of make a game time decision?
I really don't think so. He just told me that this TPLO surgery, and I'm sure Jay will elaborate on this, but he explained the physics associated with this surgery, and that it's extremely reliable, and the failure rate is extremely low. So he was very confident that she would be fully active and able to do what she did before the surgery with little or no hindrance. So that's pretty much what he told me, and with that is like, okay, let's do it. So
Yeah. All right, so we're at the big dance where the date finally comes. You guys get in there, do the surgery. It sounded like the first one went smooth, but now we're in the daunting recovery phase. This is what we're afraid of, or not afraid of, but gonna be. We know that it's going to suck. We know going into it. There's no way around it. It is what it is. Kind of guide us through the first day and just kind of developing that routine and setting the new norm with the dog on a day-to-day basis.
yeah, so dropped her off at about 7:30 in the morning, picked her up 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening. I highly recommend that you have one driver and one passenger. You're not, I mean, I would have not felt comfortable and would not feel comfortable putting the dog in a crate, because if the dog gets up and starts to move around, that's just not acceptable at that point. So my wife came with me. They brought Ruby out of the facility. There's some pictures that I included in the article. They shave, basically the back quarter of the dog and all of the one leg. They just look horrible. It was pretty. It was pretty tough. Just the whole visual scene was a little rough. But we got her in the vehicle. We got her settled down. We got her quieted down. I stayed in the back of the vehicle to support her and keep her quiet. My wife drove, and then we got home and got her into the house. So when the dog is moving, they're going to recommend that you have a sling that goes under their stomach. They'll offer, you could buy a sling there at the facility. They'll tell you can use a towel. I strongly recommend that you buy a sling. It's a piece of fabric that goes under their tummy. It's got two loop handles that come up on either side. And so you've got the lead on the dog's neck, and you've got the two loop handles that are supporting her tummy and relieving as much pressure on the leg as possible. So the dog is still walking. The dog is still, the leg is still contacting the ground, but you're providing as much support as you possibly can when the dog is moving. So we got her home. We had prepared about a 4 by 8 space in front of our wood stove in our living room. We had a one of those collapsible, foldable wire fences that we use for a containment space. Before we put that down, we put some non-slip padding that goes underneath carpet, and then we put carpet underneath that. So it's really critical that the dog is on a very secure surface. And so, linoleum or hardwood, which we have, is not going to cut it. So we had prepared a space for her with carpeting, with her dog bed, and it was about 4x8. The instructions that the vet gave me is that she needs to be in a room about the size of a small bathroom, and it needs to be carpeted, and she needs to be confined to that space except when she's going out to go potty. And when she's going out to go potty, she needs to be supported with the lead on the neck and the sling under the tummy. So, he told me that for that 8-week period, that's it. You're in room the size of a small bathroom or a space the size of a small bathroom. It's carpeted. The dog does not leave that space unless they're on a lead, the sling on the tummy, and then the only thing that they leave that space for is going potty. And you take them out, you let them go potty, they go right back into that space, and that's where they stay.
That sounds like a miserable 8 weeks.
Yeah, and my surgeon, he was, to be honest, a little intimidating about it. He was just like, and there is no cheating. He said, absolutely no cheating.
Yeah.
And he was just adamant about that, to the point where, it was just almost a little bit intimidating, like, like a trip to the principal or something. But he retired just a few weeks after Ruby's second surgery. So this was a guy with a tremendous amount of experience and knew exactly what he was talking about. And so that was comforting. But yeah, he was just like, this is it for 8 weeks.
Well, you got to think how many people try and, oh, well, the doctor, they take it as advisement rather than like conditions, right? Like if if this is a requirement, then people will treat it different. To where if a doctor just nonchalantly like, oh yeah, do a small bathroom, but just keep the dog level. People are going to go home. They're going to see their dog. They may do it for a day or two, but they're going to see how miserable their dog is in that little small confined area. And then next thing you know, that dog's getting up and down off the furniture and stuff like that. That's probably a very common thing for these vets.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And the thing is I should say, for folks listening, if you wanted that space to be, in a crate or a kennel, I'm sure that would be appropriate. It's just, this is what we chose to do. And what you just mentioned, there was a scenario that I read about. Some folks it wasn't a sporting dog. It was a family dog. TPLO surgery. After about 2 weeks, they let it out of confinement. It jumped up on the couch. The surgical repair failed. And once that repair fails, and again, I'm sure Jay will speak to this much more thoroughly than I can, but once that repair fails, going back in and making corrections to that failure, your chances of complete recovery go down dramatically. So it's just not the time to take any chances. And like you said, as bad as it sucks, this is what you got to do. So a couple of things that we did to try to help. I put a beach chair in that confinement space, the kind that puts you really close to the ground. And I would just sit in that beach chair there next to her and read or watch TV or whatever, just to be close to her. And I think, depending on your dog's personality, that might help. We would get the biggest, juiciest, soup bone or ham bone that we could find and give that to her about, once in the evening once a day and let her just spend an hour working that thing over, just doing whatever we could to provide some sort of, mental stimulation. Bottom line, they're in that confined space for 8 weeks. They go out to go potty and they go back in, and that's the way it goes.
Mm. Now, talk about medications and all that stuff. I mean, how long were we on painkillers? Did they prescribe anything else? Was there anything else day to day? Did they do supplements in the food? Did they change the food? Like, did anything in that light change for you?
Not really, no. And now that you mentioned the medication, early on for the first, I don't know, I'm going to say 8 to 10 days. That could be off. There was a little more stronger pain medication, and then anti-inflammatories after that. The vet strongly recommended icing for about the first week or two after the surgery, and that was a joke. Uh, she would not, she would not tolerate an ice pack at all. And I reference another technique that I used in the article. It's called PEMF, pulse electromagnetic frequency,
Yeah.
and it's kind of an alternative technique to reduce swelling. Don't expect your vet to endorse it, but I've used it a lot individually, and I've used it a lot on my dogs, and it works really well. So that was a substitute that worked really well, and that whole technique is supposed to accelerate healing as well. So that's what I did. But yeah, you'll be expected to ice, but Ruby was having
None of it.
nothing to do with it.
Was it just the ice pack? Was it the sound of the ice? I mean, what like would she bear it until the skin got cold, like, or was it just just all the above, not having it?
She just the second it went on her, she was just done.
Yeah,
She was trying to get away. She was kind of nipping at it and trying to get it away. Yeah, she wasn't having anything to do with it. And I
gotcha.
I tried. I mean, I tried, but it was just a losing effort. So I went with this other option, and I put some links in my article to this other technique, this PEMF technique that I used, and the device that I used for that. So folks are interested in that, they can access that in that article. And again, consult your vet because you want to follow their advice for the well-being of your dog. But there's going to have to be a little bit of give and take, in terms of what they'll tolerate and what they won't.
Yeah,
So
no, makes sense. So it sounds like you guys kind of it sucked. It is what it is, as we've already alluded to. But you're kind of, it sounds like you're just making your way through it. Like it is what it is. Y'all are embracing it, and y'all got into a routine and you're making it happen. Anything else stand out to you on this first confinement period on the first leg before we get into the second leg?
yeah. So I'll just say that I was really surprised how well she adjusted to the whole situation. I thought it was going to be a rodeo every day, and it certainly could be, and maybe with some dogs it would be. I really thought it would be with Ruby. But after we got into the routine, she really accepted it pretty well. And I think there's a lot to be said for the owner, for the handler. Just be confident, be calm, and not that I was always either of those, but be confident, be calm, and just go forward like this is the way it's going to be, this is the way it needs to be. And dogs, generally speaking, they will accept that. And if the boss is okay with it and calm and collected and not stressed out, generally the dog will follow.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be exceptions to that, as we all know. And I know so much more now than I did then. And when I was in the middle of it, I wasn't nearly that philosophical about it as I am now. But looking back, there's a lot to be said for that. So just be calm, confident, act like this is what we need to do, act like, nothing's changed, and the dog will accept that, and you'll get through it.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we preach about in the training field as well. The dog's going to pick up on your energy. It's going to follow your lead. Be calm, cool, collected. Speak only when you need to, and all of that stuff kind of gets wrapped up all into the same package, and can really make or break a dog's demeanor, attitude, energy, all of that stuff. They're going to feed off of you.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, and I include a lot of details in the article that I think would be benefit. Ruby was constipated for about the first 4 days. The anesthesia will do that. That was really stressful. um, and there were a few other things here and there that would come up, and I covered those in the article, and those would probably best be just addressed there if people are interested. And but overall it went pretty smooth.
Yeah. So on a day-to-day basis, she's confined to the 4x8. How much attention is required by you? I mean, obviously we don't want her moving around or anything like that, but like, did you have to watch her 24/7 like a hawk? Are we talking about, if somebody has a job, they need to figure out somebody to sit with the dog? Like, walk me through the level of attention required by you outside of just taking the dog outside to go to the bathroom or feeding time. Like, was it something that you really had to provide supervision around the clock?
I would say it was COVID, so I was working from home at the time, which is unusual for me. So I had that advantage. But that's a really good question, something that I hadn't really thought about. I would, for me personally, I think I would highly recommend, you know, of some level of supervision. I mean, you don't have to have eyes on them 24/7, but having somebody in the house who's there, who can just be there and deal with situations that may come up. One of the things that the vet said, if the UPS guy comes to the door
Mm,
and the dog jumps up, and is trying to get to the door, some dogs, that can be kind of a stressful situation for them, and they can really, get after it. He said, you need to be there to apply the necessary type of restraint, and so I would say that, yeah, I think if it's possible, I would say that some light supervision is probably the best thing. Again, I think your vet could probably answer that. So if I need to leave my dog in the crate while I'm at work, and I'm at work for 7 or 8 hours, what's that going to look like? Is that going to be okay? Is that not going to be okay? Those are sort of the questions you'd want to ask. We were really fortunate at the time that both my wife and I were home. So we were home. She was in that space. We were going about, doing our business. So we were able to provide that level of supervision just by default, I guess you could say. But I would, if I were going to go through it again and I was working away from home like I do now, if it were all possible, I think I would want somebody home with the dog. I think that would be best for both the dog and the owner.
yeah. Did you say how much Ruby weighed at this time? I'm curious how much leverage or benefit the sling gives you carrying the dog. And I'm thinking, maybe your wife or somebody else that's smaller, and maybe they have the larger breed. Maybe they live on a third-story apartment complex or something like that, to where, how much consideration would you say that the average person needs to give to carrying the full weight of the dog day after day like this? For a lot of us guys, that's probably not the biggest concern, but I know that there's a lot of a lot of female dog owners out there right now that might be something that they will need to figure out.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be an issue. You're not providing that much pressure. You're just providing just enough support so that they can take some weight off of that injured limb. Um, but my wife, was able to handle that with, without any issues whatsoever. I
Perfect.
really don't think that's a consideration. I even, I would say probably, um, you know, probably a 12-year-old child would probably be able to handle it if they knew how to handle dogs and were used to being around dogs, they'd probably be fine.
Perfect.
So it's just you're just providing some support there. You're not lifting, so to speak. You're just providing some support there.
Perfect. All right, so let's get into the second injury because the first one, while, it sucked, we didn't want it to happen, you at least had a cool little hunting story to go along with it, right? The second
Yeah.
story, you don't have that because you're on the recovery of the first one. Walk us through what happened. How did the second one come to be? Was it just timed out? Was it just a ticking time bomb and it was eventually going to go? Or did something specific actually happen to Ruby?
Yeah. So before we get to that, I should say that at the end of that 8 weeks, we had another 4 weeks, and that 4 weeks was the confinement was removed, but it was no getting up on furniture, no stairs, no hills, and in the backyard on a leash without the sling for the next 4 weeks. So there is some movement around the house, but still that movement still has to be monitored. There are some limits there. And then backyard on the leash. And that was for an additional 4 weeks. So that takes us to 12 weeks. And then there was an additional 4 weeks after that that takes us to a 16 weeks total. That final 4 weeks, what I was instructed to do is for the first of that final 4 weeks, it's a 10-minute leash walk outside for the first week, and then adding 5-minute increments to the following weeks until finally that 16th week, you're up to. So you start out at 10, 5, 10, 15, 20. You're up to a 20-minute walk on leash, on level ground for that final week. So let me say that one more time to make sure that that's clear. I don't think I said that very well. So the final 4 weeks, you're taking walks outside, you're on a lead, you're on a level surface. You start with 10-minute walks, and then you increase in 5-minute increments for the following 3 weeks. Does that
Mm,
make sense?
it does. Yeah.
Okay. And then at that point, she's back in. Of course, at the end of the first 8 weeks, she was back into the vet. He took x-rays, verified that everything looked great. And so that got us free from the strict confinement, but still confinement in the house, leash on the backyard for potty trips. And then the final 4 weeks, leash walks outside. And then at the end of that final 4 weeks, it's back into the vet again, more x-rays, examination, and then everything looks good. You're cleared to go. And I asked him, I said, so when you say I'm cleared for full activity, does that mean full activity? And his words were, well, don't, when you get her home, don't throw a frisbee for her, but she can resume, the level of activity that she had prior to the injury. And Nick, and I'm just going to take a minute right here before we go to this the second knee that was injured. I mentioned this in the article, and I got the impression from both my regular vet here in town and from the surgeon, I just never got the feeling that they quite understood the level of exertion that we're putting on our dogs. I could be wrong about that, but I just got the feeling that they just didn't quite understand, what it looks like running the Chucker Hills in Eastern Oregon.
Yeah.
And so
The
I'll just throw that in there because I wasn't going to take her on a chucker hunt, just because she'd been cleared by the vet.
Yeah. Well, and that
And
is
so,
something that I actually had written down after reading your article was he says don't go throw a frisbee, but you're fine to resume your activities previous to the injury. And I'm sitting here like, I don't know about you, but me throwing a frisbee isn't really that demanding of a physical standpoint for my dog. So that was kind of contradictory in the way I took it.
and it was for me too. And it certainly probably wasn't meant that way. I mean, this guy's coming from years and years of experience. I have a tremendous amount of respect and gratitude for everything he did. But I just, I've had conversations with other vets about exertion, and I get the sense that they just don't really get it. Now, there's dogs out there, there's vets out there who work with gun dogs or have gun dogs. Certainly they understand what the situation is, but
Yeah.
I would just throw that caution out there to your listeners. Just feel really confident that your vet understands the level of exertion your dog is going through. Because I don't know that they always appreciate that. I could be wrong. I hope I am, but that's just the general feeling that I've gotten in the past.
It's hard finding a vet that can understand or grasp what we do. You know, it's not every day. Not everybody has access to a Jay Brecky or Seth Bynum or a Joe Spoo or anything like that. You know, those guys, those are gun dog. Uh, they own their own hunting dogs. They do it. They
Right.
understand it. So I would encourage anybody to at least pick up the phone, try and make some phone calls, try and use your network to reach guys that may be in the field that maybe fully understand that if you have that lingering concern. But to your point, you know, all of the vets out there, you know, I'm not going to say that there's a vet out there that necessarily gets into it because they want to see dogs fail, right? Like they're saying
No, of
everything
course.
with the best intentions, but to your point, if they don't have some kind of if they can't relate to what we do or they haven't seen it or witnessed it, it's hard to put into words. They just think that you're out there running and you know in a green grass field. They don't understand the level of terrain or downfall that you know how Ruby got her first injury. They can't grasp that because they've probably never seen it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think that's something that's really worth mentioning. I think it's would be, maybe an interesting question um, for any of the vets that you talk to. For I believe it's Jay that you're going to be talking to next.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just something that is definitely worth saying. So wanted just to bring that up, and then so she was cleared for full activity, and I just kind of eased back into it. Hunting season was over, so there wasn't that level of exertion, but we were doing some fun runs and some hikes, and then daily leash walks when we couldn't do those, which is part of our normal routine. And I was just coming down the street, coming back from the park down the street, and just no, nothing specific that I can point to that, oh, this caused that. But she just started limping on her right side, and it looked exactly like it did on the left. And as soon as I got home, I called the vet and I said, I'm pretty sure she just tore a right one. And we got her in, and sure enough, the
Mm.
right one was torn. So um, here we go again. The only thing that was different this time was that emotionally, and there's a little section in the article that I talk about this. I was I was a wreck that evening. I was a mess, and I was just telling my wife, literally through tears, is like I can't do this again. This is just, and I don't know that she could really relate to that, but I know that the people that are listening and you can probably relate to this. It's just I can't go through this again. This is not what I do with my dog. This is not what my dog does with me. And she just said, "Well, suck it up, Buttercup. It's not you with the torn ACL. It's the dog. You don't have any other choice. Let's just get her done." And so obviously that's what we did.
Good on
Um,
her. Good on her. But yeah,
yeah.
I can relate. I can empathize. I can put myself. I think I even told you when we initially discussed after reading the article, my heart just sank in that section when you said that she came up lame on the other side. Like again, people that don't understand or can't relate, they can't fully grasp what these dogs mean to us and just the lifestyle. And I can only imagine how tore up you were about, to where Ruby, yeah, she can't understand completely what's going on, but she was the one that was actually confined for that long. So I can't help but put, you know, anthropomorphize her, as much as I hate doing
Mhm.
that. But it's like, all right, she finally got freedom. She finally got to start running again. And then immediately right out of the gate, and we're back.
Yeah. So it was rough, but we got after it. We got her back in, and there was the second surgery. There was one minor concern that the surgeon had. He told me he called me before I was scheduled to pick her up. So dropped her off in the morning. Was planning to pick her up in the afternoon after work, and he called me early afternoon, and he said that when he was placing one of the screws in the repair, that he was manipulating the leg and he felt a little pop or crack.
Mm.
And he said he x-rayed it. He examined it really thoroughly, and he couldn't find anything that appeared that it had failed, but he couldn't deny that he'd felt something there. And he said that Ruby was acting a lot more agitated in her kennel there at the vet facility than she had the first time. And he interpreted that as her being in more pain. And so he asked to keep her overnight, which he listened to the professionals, right? So
Right.
absolutely keep her overnight. Called me the next day and said, she's still pretty agitated, but I think the best thing to do is to get her home. And so went, picked her up, and she was just a mess.
Mm.
And again, the vet staff, I think, was interpreting that as her being in a lot of pain. Maybe that was the case, but she was just not happy. She'd been through the routine once before. She's a really smart dog. She knew that, okay, I get this weird stuff done to me. I hang out with these weird people for the day and then I get to go home. Well, that didn't happen. And she was just a mess. And so he gave me a higher level of painkiller. It was a patch to put on her bare skin, and we got her home, applied the patch, and she settled right down. So I think the agitation that he was seeing was more psychological than medical. I could be wrong.
Just
Um,
anxious.
yeah, but that's just another thing that I would say to your listeners is you have to take everything that professional tells you seriously, because they have the knowledge and the best in mind for your dog, but you also know your dog better than anybody else on the planet. And be aware that you know your intuition might be correct, and always calculate that into the situation. But anyway, we got her home. She settled right down. The vet was concerned that screw, that when he was placing that screw and he felt that pop when he was manipulating the bone, he was afraid that there was going to be a failure there. And so what he had me do is video Ruby walking with the lead and the sling. He had me video her walking forward and back up and down the hall. I put a link to that video in the article that I did. I would do that every so often and then send him the video just for him to be able to look at. And we were really blessed that there were no issues. But he was just worried that there was going to be some sort of an alignment issue there, I guess, and that we'd have to go in and try to correct that problem. But that nothing nothing of the sort happened.
Mhm. Well,
So we were
and
really
that's
blessed
all we
with
can ask of a vet is to be forthcoming with us. You know, he could have easily checked it all out, x-rayed it, sent the dog home, and not erred on the side of caution and been honest with you. You know, it would have been very easy for him to pretend like he didn't witness or feel that pop. And I would much prefer the vet do that right there. Hey, here's a disclaimer. You know, I'm not saying it's messed up, but we need to be aware of it because somebody could sweep that under the rug. And then if there was a pop, if there was an issue, if there was a failure, then, you know, that might get uncovered 2 or 3 weeks from now and you would have had no clue. And then you're back, you know, scratching your head asking what the heck happened. At least he was honest and forthcoming. And to me, that is a good sign of a vet, just the honesty factor into that. That would play a huge part in my eyes.
Yeah, and it was very, very appreciated. You know, and it just shows that he had her best. He had her best in mind. He wasn't worried. You know, it wasn't his ego. It wasn't his reputation. It was like we need to do what's best for this dog. So really, really appreciate that. Shout out to Dr. Flynn. I know he's not listening to this, but he's probably on a yacht in the Caribbean right now. So 100% on that. So we went through the whole procedure again. It was brutal. It sucked, but we got through it. And here we are. Oh, so that was 2020. So here we are 4 years later. And this could be a whole nother discussion, but she did a lot better after the surgery. There was a lot less lameness. There was still some, but there was a lot less. But as time went on, there was some lameness that was returning that the vet determined was just related to advanced state of arthritis. And this was back in November. So this is going through a hunting season. I had since acquired a second dog so I could really cut back and limit the number of hours that Ruby was putting on that leg and do right by her in terms of the level of exertion that she could handle. But even with the lower levels of exertion, she was still really struggling with some lameness. And it was never limping per se like it was prior to the surgery. It was just this overall stiffness from arthritis. She had, I don't know, it was her front right or front left. She had a pretty bad limp. And I was concerned, took her into the vet, and they did everything. They had x-rays, blood work, the whole 9 yards. Couldn't find anything, determined whatever it was had to be soft tissue. I asked about Librela, and my vet, she was very positive about that. And so in November, we started her on Librela, which I don't know if your listeners are familiar with. I became familiar with Librela through a podcast and was convinced that this was probably the way to go. And so we started that in November, and it's it's pretty incredible.
So,
It's
can you
pretty,
explain the Librella? Because I had that written down. Because I mean, yeah, I could have Googled it, but I was curious. I'm not all that familiar with it either. Obviously, you don't have to go into too much detail, but I mean, ultimately, is it addressing that arthritis, or you know,
yeah.
is it doing something else?
And I'm not gonna play medical professional here, but what it does is it dramatically reduces the pain and takes a dog that has a hard time just getting out of her bed in the morning to a dog that is able to really resume almost completely normal activity.
Hmm.
So it's my understanding is that it blocks the pain receptors, I believe is what it does. And so I don't think it necessarily reduces the inflammation. I could be wrong about that, but my understanding is that it blocks the pain receptors, and it just makes the dog just a lot more comfortable. My understanding is that it's been a therapy that's been available in Europe for quite a few years, came to the US not long ago and was used on cats and was just cleared for dogs within, I believe, the last year or so.
Hmm.
But for Ruby, it's been a game changer.
Nice.
It's been an absolute game changer. the improvement in the range of motion and the amount of soreness and just her overall comfort is it's really remarkable.
Nice.
So I would go ahead and say that without Librella, this season may have been her last in terms of hunting, on a regular basis or for extended amounts of time. But with Librella, I think as long as the improvement that we've seen continues, I think she's got another 3, 4 years, maybe more. So
Awesome. Awesome.
yeah,
So with the Librella, you mentioned adding a second dog and just rotating, and that way you're not putting the workload all on Ruby. You're kind of dividing that out. What other changes have you done, if any? Have you changed anything? Nutrition, supplements, just day to day lifestyle, anything that now that you're kind of aware of these potential joint issues, are you doing anything else since the surgeries and this journey and experience?
yeah. So I have two different supplements. One is the Canine Athlete New Dog, and the other one is the one that the surgeon recommended, and that is Dazaquin. And so I give those two supplements, and I give them to both dogs. Onyx is a black poodle pointer. She's 4 years old, and I have not experienced any of the muscular skeletal arthritic relate problems that I experienced with Ruby. Onyx will go all day if I let her, and come back the next day, you know,
Asking for
ready to
more.
get after it again.
Yeah.
But the thing is so in terms of supplements, I do the Dazaquin, I do the New Dog. The one other thing is that I watch their weight a lot more closely. The vet did tell me with Ruby when I first took her in, she was probably a pound or two overweight, which surprised me because she didn't look like she was to me. I'm real focused on maintaining a more appropriate weight, particularly with both dogs. There's just and I know this is hard to say because there's a lot of people out there with, with older dogs and dogs that may have been spayed or neutered and the weight issues that that causes. But in my view, there is just no room for obesity in a sporting dog. And I realize that it can't be that simple and cut and dried for everybody. But as for my dogs, there's just after going through what I've gone through, that's just not an option.
Yeah. No, that makes
So
sense. Well, I mean, I think we've done a pretty good job of going through everything in detail, and your article goes into even more detail and thoroughness. So anybody interested in that, check the show notes. I'll have the article linked, as well as you have an email address if somebody has any questions. Maybe they're facing this decision, they want to ask you some specifics or something. You're open and willing to have that conversation with them. Kind of circling back to the very start of this episode, you were talking about how you didn't really have somebody to reach out to and bounce ideas off of, and so you're willing to be that resource for others, and that's commendable. So anybody interested in that, check the show notes for that. Cliff, as we wrap this up, what is something throughout this journey and process that sticks out to you that maybe I didn't ask you about?
I would just say if you were as ignorant as I was, and maybe as overconfident as I was, perhaps, and thought everything was under control, just reach out to somebody who's been there. Reach out to an experienced bird dog owner. And if you're seeing something that doesn't look quite right, reach out and talk to somebody and get advice from somebody who's been there before, because I could have avoided who knows what I could have avoided, maybe none of this, but I was just a little bit, I think, overconfident in my own abilities in terms of what I thought was normal and not normal, or needed attention or didn't need attention. So if anything, pops up that just doesn't look quite right, find somebody that you can talk to, hopefully somebody that can put eyes on the dog and give you some good advice. And the other thing that I would say that I have really learned is that the the prey drive in these dogs is going to mask a lot of pain. Animals, wild animals, they have nothing to gain from showing pain or weakness. For a pack animal, that's just going to expose them to challenges from other members of the pack. And for other animals in general, I mean, you show pain or weakness and you're probably going to get eaten in terms of wild animals. And these dogs, with their intense prey drive, I know there were times, with Ruby pre-injury when she was in pain, but that drive, she's just pushing through it. And you're seeing your dogs bounding up that hill or making that retrieve or making that 200-yard cast or whatever it is, and you're thinking, there's nothing wrong with this dog. You don't know that. And so one of the things I said in the article is you have to be the coach and you have to set the limits. And if you see anything that looks off, stop and give some advice, because these dogs will push through a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort, and it may cause you, like it caused me, to think, oh, there's no problems here. How could she go all day like that if she was in pain? Well, we don't necessarily know that they're not. It's just that prey drive is just pushing them and masking a lot of what we might otherwise see. So that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned from this whole experience. You have got to set the limits because they won't.
Yeah. All great advice, all great tips. I hate that you had to go through the journey not once, but even twice. But I appreciate the fact that you were willing to share your experience and be forthcoming with everything, the honesty of it. And yeah, hopefully it's again, to reiterate what I said at the start of this is something that obviously nobody wants, nobody's looking for, but it is a real concern. And I just appreciate you taking the time and putting all the lessons learned and your thoughts on the article, and then coming on here to share it with everybody else. I appreciate that.
Yep, you're welcome. And if there's anybody out there, just drop me an email. It's like Nick said there, it's in the show notes. It's just navigating TPLO@gmail.com. Don't hesitate, shoot me an email and we'll exchange phone numbers, and I'll help you as much as I can. Because if you don't have the somebody to talk to, somebody who's been through it, it's really helpful.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. Your time again, Cliff. We'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks, Nick.